Today I fucked up. I asked my sister who died and she responded. This happened yesterday and still feels so bad right now. I am a very sarcastic person. My sister is an amazing person. Yesterday, I asked her if she's able to drive me to an appointment and she agreed. During my appointment, her gyne doctor called her and she's able to rush quickly to see her. My sister was 5 months pregnant, so she rushed and left me at my doctor appointment and agreed to pick me up afterwards. An hour later, she came, picked me up and said, "I have bad news." I thought she got a parking ticket or something, so I responded, "Who died?" She responded, "The baby." She was 5 months pregnant, so it was a fetus. I was a bit confused because I wasn't expecting that response. She chuckled, but responded, "Not the response you were expecting, huh?" She was very forgiving about my sarcasm. We drove to home and bought takeout and desserts to help cope with the sad news. Update: she had to drive back home to discuss options with her husband. Yes, the unborn baby is still inside her. She is having an induced labor tomorrow. Too long didn't read. My sister was 5 months pregnant. I asked my sister who died as a sarcastic response, thinking she got a parking ticket, and she responded, "The unborn baby." Last time I used that line. Shit man, so sorry for your sister. Doesn't seem like she's mad at you and you don't have to feel bad. I think you didn't know what was up and it seems like that was just your natural way of talking. You meant no harm. But I think she would greatly appreciate if you can be there for her now, because that shit is rough. All my love to you and her. I asked my sister who died, and I genuinely thought it was a supernatural story. Anyway, so sorry for her loss. Edit, spelled supernatural wrong, wrote in Portuguese. Oh man, that's rough. I have been on the other end of that comment. Mom died when I was 14. She was a terrible, horrible, abusive person, but of course her death still hit me hard. I went to school the next day because staying home was haunting. I walked into school apparently looking terrible, and this one girl, known for being incredibly snarky and a bro girl, always picking on me, did her usual thing of coming up to me and eyeing me and deciding what casual bitchy thing to say, and ended up saying, "Hey, who died?" I replied, "My mom," and burst into tears. She ended up being mortified, wrapped her arms around me and held me until the bell rang. We ended up becoming friends until I moved. I've been there before. One time I went over to a friend's house and he looked pretty sad, so I said, "What's wrong? You look like your dog just died." His dog died that morning. That's the last time I used that phrase. Found out that my brother and sister-in-law lost their expected child to a fairly late miscarriage, so I asked him if he wanted to meet up for a pint to take his mind off it. They'd just bought a new family car in preparation, so meeting in the car park I greeted him with a "Hey, how you doing?" Nodding at car. "Is this your new baby then?" Had to do some backpedaling on that one to explain I just meant new. Never mind. Slaps roof. You can put so many babies inside this baby. Today I fucked up by texting my ex-wife that I showed our daughter a 15-inch dick. So this actually happened today. Me and my girlfriend were taking my two daughters 10F, 13F, horseback riding. My daughters have never been horseback riding and they were a bit nervous. I suggested we look through the stable and pet the horses to help get them acclimated. We were about to head out to join our trail ride group when my oldest pointed out that a horse was peeing. Male horse. My youngest's eyes got as wide as saucers, her jaw dropped and her hands lifted up, stopping a little more than a ruler width apart. Everybody laughed and I said, "Yes, he has quite a hose." As we continued out, I took out my phone and texted my girlfriend a Redditor. Today I fucked up by showing my daughter and 15 penis. I put my phone back in my pocket. Then it hit me. I ripped my phone out of my pocket and had a very similar reaction to my daughter as I realized it wasn't my girlfriend I had texted. It was my ex-wife. I added a lol, wrong person, and then explained what my daughter had seen. I then took a screenshot of the text and sent that to my girlfriend, who nearly fell off her horse. She was laughing so hard. Too long didn't read. Sent my ex-wife a text about a giant dick that was meant for my girlfriend. Update: I now have 20x the karma I had when I went to bed and my first awards ever. Thank you so much. I did get a response, but it's probably anticlimactic for some. Here is a screenshot. Update 2, pic of the horse for the shikos. No, I won't be giving out his address. You know that horse's dick is going to come back to bite you in the ass. Then your ex-wife text back, well, you never showed me half that. Not even on my best day. I grew up in a city and never really saw horses, so when I went on a road trip with my friends in my late teens, I looked over at these majestic beasts and was like, oh my god, you guys, those horses are fighting. They were not fighting, they were fucking, as I eventually realized as we were driving away and I saw a huge horse dong. My friends still give me shit to this day. Just wait until she sees an elephant pee. I've been next to peeing horses and wow, a Clydesdale will fill a 15-gallon bucket. Lol, wrong person. OMFG. Imagine going about your life and randomly getting this pair of texts with zero context. It deserves a "are you okay?" Today I fucked up by trying to kayak across the Mississippi River in a cheap kayak I won in a grocery store contest. Sank halfway across and got hypothermia while swimming to the other side. This happened about a decade ago, but a few days after, I wrote everything down so I wouldn't forget. Saw something on my feed today that made me remember it, and thought this would be a good place to share. Warning, it's long. The day before yesterday, as I was driving to pick up lunch, I thought, why not paddle across the Mississippi River? I live in New Orleans, about 2 miles from the river proper, and while I'd driven over it too many times to count, I'd never heard of someone paddling across it. Apparently, with good reason. Being impulsive, I of course wanted to do it right then. Instead, I gave myself the night to think about it. So, yesterday, I threw my kayak on a friend's truck, tossed a bilge pump and extra paddle behind the seat, lashed down a camelback, and we set off for the levee. Upon arriving, I got everything ready to go, strapped on my life vest, and pushed off into the river. Once I was actually on the water, I realized why I hadn't heard about many people crossing the river. It was a lot bigger than what I'd visualized. Still, after 15 minutes of paddling in the calm water near the edge, I decided that I was ready to tempt fate and steer for the opposite bank. Tempt fate, I did. Until about a quarter of the way across, it was easy going. I was making great time, and my paddle was slicing through the water. For once, there wasn't a bit of river traffic in either direction, unless you counted the empty, stationary barges that were moored on either side of the river. When I hit the quarter-way mark, or at least, what I determined to be the 1/4 point, the water suddenly got choppy. Much choppier than it looked from the bank and even from my initial survey once I got on the water. Still, it felt like something I'd be able to handle. I grit my teeth, angled the kayak so it was flowing more in line with the current than across it, and kept paddling. Once I got halfway across the river, I was exhilarated. I was actually going to do this. I picked my paddle out of the water and leaned back to enjoy the view, the quiet air around me, the noise of the river below, and just take it all in, when the main channel current hit my little kayak like a freight train running into a Mazda Miata. Before I had time to think of what was happening, the kayak began to roll left. This wasn't a little roll, it was a full-blown, no recovery barrel roll. Still, I leaned right as much as I could and tried to correct for it before realizing it was futile, and that I was going over regardless of what I did. The little breath I'd managed to take before plunging into the water was forcibly expelled from my lungs when my torso hit the water's surface. Near the shore, the water wasn't that cold. It was nippy, but the shallow water and the bright sun meant that the water was being warmed considerably along the banks. Out in the middle of the river, with the main current, the water was freezing cold. It may have been the icy mountain runoff from states away being carried downstream, but whatever it was, it started sucking the energy out of my body as soon as I came in contact with it. My initial response was to scramble back into the kayak. I forgot everything I knew about a wet re-entry and launched myself over the cockpit, shuffling awkwardly until I got my feet back down inside of the hull. When it rolled over yet again, dunking me below the surface one more time, I pushed out underwater again, then tried to climb back in the same way one more time, with the same results. By now, I was starting to feel the cold trickle into my fingers and my toes. I focused on my breathing, and tried to stop sucking in huge lungfuls of panicked air and Mississippi River water. I made my move to get back into the kayak one last time, before I realized how much water had splashed in over the course of my last 2 attempts. This was going to be my last chance, if I wanted to have any shot at pumping out the water once I got back in. I re-entered the cockpit one last time, but instead of rolling me out, the entire boat just dipped down an inch or two below the waterline. I looked down and realized that the boat was sinking, with me in it. There wasn't going to be time to pump out the water, not unless I could pump the entire Mississippi. Before the kayak went down completely, I managed to pull a dry bag out from the stow compartment that had my phone and a pair of socks in it. Not that I was thinking about either one at the time, only that I had overinflated it and it could possibly act as a buoy of sorts. That and the life jacket I was wearing. By now, I was beginning to really worry. The last time I'd looked at the shore, the people I had come with were mere specks. I had no way of knowing whether or not they'd seen what happened. As it turned out, they thought I was doing just fine and was probably already relaxing on the other side by then. I paused completely for just a second to review my situation. My mind was in overdrive, but at the same time, it was completely calm. At least, for that moment. I realized just what was happening. I was in the middle of the largest river in the United States, with only my head and orange dry bag above water. Imagine for a second that your body is buried at the center of a football field, all that is above ground is your head. Now, from bank to bank, the point of the river that I was crossing was 61 miles. This doesn't sound like much, until you realize that halfway across is 5 football fields. That means that you, in the middle of the field, have 500 yards on either side of your head. Add to that the fact that I was in water, not land, with waves jostling me and pushing me around, and I knew I was in a bad spot. I was midway from either bank, and I had a strong current that wasn't going to let me go without a fight. Not only that, but there was no river traffic to speak of, which meant that likely nobody would just happen to come across me. Well, unless I bumped into them floating face down somewhere miles and miles downstream. This is what I like to call panic. The calm was over, and now I was faced with the stark realization what a stupid predicament I'd gotten myself into. I hadn't thought it out completely, or at all. I didn't take time to ensure that I had a backup plan or a way to abort if I needed or even wanted to. I simply took a kayak out on a major working river of the world and set across it as if it was a neighborhood lake. No more short, relaxed breaths. Now they were choppy, jagged, and letting in more and more water along with them. I started to swim as if my life depended on it, which for this one point in time in my life like no other that I've ever experienced, it honestly did. I've always been a strong swimmer, and I'm scuba certified. If there was anything I wouldn't have given at that moment for a tank and some fins, I don't know what it would have been, so I knew that trying to fight the current was asking for disaster. I needed to use my body's energy as efficiently as I could, a fact that was being further complicated by the temperature of the water. According to weather.com, Edu, the Mississippi was a frigid 44.0 F that day. In water between 50-60 F. The average person has between 1 to 2 hours before exhaustion/unconsciousness sets in. Drop below this and the number plummets drastically. At 44 F, the time you have from entry into the water until you're exhausted and unconscious is about 40 minutes. When your core temperature drops 3 F, you undergo a significant loss of dexterity as well as intense shivering. When you lose 7 F of your core temperature, you begin to shake uncontrollably, shiver, have slurred speech, and may have mental lapses. As your temperature gets lower, the symptoms become more and more severe. I began to kick for the shore. Though the waves were lapping at my forehead, I could tell that the current had moved me closer to my original destination, the other side of the river. I began to swim as much against the current as I possibly could, trying to angle myself so that I would get pushed toward the outside of the stream as it moved me along. Although I mentioned I'm a strong swimmer under normal circumstances, one arm was immobilized for the most part as a result of holding the bright orange dry bag, and my feet felt clumsy as a result of the Newport H2s that I was wearing. Still, I didn't feel like I should give up either one just yet, especially not the dry bag, as even in my debilitated state I realized it was my best chance at getting noticed from above or from a passing ship. Began to fall into a sort of rhythm. I would kick for a few minutes and do a somewhat comical version of a side stroke, then check my progress and see if I was actually moving. I would look again and again, and the shore never seemed to be any closer. By this time both my hands and my feet were solid chunks of ice. I was barely able to maintain my grip on the dry bag, so I pushed it up my forearm where I would have a better chance of keeping it attached to my body. The water shoes I was wearing felt as if they were causing more drag than they were worth, so I used one foot against the other to push them off and away from me. The side stroke wasn't moving me, so I moved into a modified version of the breaststroke. Having the luxury of hindsight, I now know that was probably the smartest thing I'd done all day. While it's not the fastest stroke, it is the most energy efficient. After a few minutes of this, I realized that I was out of the main channel. I was in slower moving water, and most importantly, I was getting closer to the bank. I looked to the side and realized that there were a series of barges all in a line, and they were being pushed up the river. I could see the water foaming around the front as they were pushed from behind. I began to swim toward them, careful not to get too close as I didn't want to get run over, and started to shout as I reached the end, anticipating the engine ship to appear at any second. Instead, I came to the end and realized that there was nothing behind them. The water wasn't foaming because they were being pushed upriver, it was foaming because I was moving downriver and they were stationary. For a split second, I felt ready to give up. Couldn't feel my hands, my feet seemed to have disappeared, and I was tired of fighting against the current. I wasn't getting anywhere, and the only chance I had of being rescued had just vanished. Then, a glimmer of a realization finally broke through the cloudy muddle of my cold numbed thoughts. The area immediately behind the barges would be protected from most of the effects of the current. If I could reach this area, I would at least stand a reasonable chance of being able to break free from the river's clutches and make it to shore. I looked over, and sure enough, the water directly behind the barge was virtually ripple-free, at least, in comparison to what I was already in. I saw that dead zone getting further and further away and knew that if I didn't reach it before the current pulled me back into the river proper, I probably wouldn't have enough energy left to make another try for the shore. I moved into the front crawl, or at least the best version of it I could do with a 20-liter inflated dry bag over my left forearm. This has always been my strongest stroke, and I knew that I had to use it, even at the cost of expending the little energy I had left. Shifted my weight, changed my stroke, and swam harder than I've ever done before in my entire life. Unfortunately, what I didn't take into account was that it's my strongest stroke in pool or lake water. Not freezing cold, semi-hypothermic, river swimming. What I'd intended to be a strong stroke, slicing me through the water, was in fact a painful discombobulated mess, with my arms and legs thrown askew as I willed myself forward inch by inch. After 3 agonizing minutes of this, I finally gave up. Just wasn't going to happen. Every muscle in my body was cramped, and the cold had spread from my hands into my arms, from my feet into my calves and quads. By now, I'd been in the water about half an hour. I was starting to feel warm. And in 44F water, warm is not a good sign. I stopped swimming, no point to it, really. Not anymore. Turned over, and faced the sky, which was a surprisingly beau today. I fucked up a shade of blue. There were 2 contrails crossing each other several thousand feet above me. Other than that, not a cloud in the sky. It just looked so peaceful. In fact, everything about it was peaceful. I was back in the kayak, in the middle of the river, just taking it all in. I could even feel the jab of the backrest against me. Except, it wasn't. It was more pointed than the backrest, and it was damn uncomfortable. It felt like something hard and sharp poking against me, and it was interrupting my communion with the river. I looked behind me, over my shoulder, and realized I was poking against a submerged tree of some kind. Not only this, but there were dozens of them, and they were all near the shore. Almost miraculously, my sad attempt at a front crawl had been enough to clear me into the dead zone at the last moment, where I had been drifting closer and closer to the shoreline. I hadn't noticed it because I had flipped over onto my back to gaze skyward. My fingers weren't responding, so I ended up clapping my hands together around the tree, pulling it toward my chest, and me to it. I moved to the next shrub down the line, with each one coming closer and closer to the shore. Just a few minutes later, I was gasping for breath with my teeth knocking into each other uncontrollably, huddled on the ground on the other side of the river. Lay like this for several minutes, unable to process the fact that I was on dry land, and not able to pick myself up to move. I just lay there with my muscles spasming, and stared at the earth beneath me. Finally, I got up, and started walking away from the river. As I had kicked off my shoes in the water, I was barefoot, walking over all manner of trees, thorns, and crud the river had thrown up from its gullet. None of this mattered. I still couldn't feel my feet, and even if I could, I didn't have a choice in the matter. I knew the levee was close by, and if I could get to the levee, I could summon help. I staggered drunkenly through the underbrush, having to wade chest deep in 3 different marsh areas that lay between myself and the levee, before finally seeing it, and a chimney from a house behind it. When I got on top of the levee, I looked in the dry bag. While it wasn't completely dry inside, and I can't blame the manufacturer for it, as I doubt it was ever intended to be a personal flotation device, it was dry enough for the cell phone inside to still be operational, even after the repeated abuse I'd inflicted by flailing my way to the bank of the Mississippi. I called the people who had come with me, and heard, "So, you made it to the other side?" They had no idea of what had just happened. Even then, I was still cold enough so speaking incomprehensible sentences was out of the question. But I managed to get out the gist of things. Boat sank. Swam on levee. 15 minutes later, I was inside of a toasty SUV on the way home, with a life jacket, a dry bag, and a stomach full of river water. There were a lot of things that I came to realize when I was out there. Perhaps the most important of these is that I'm going to die. There's no favoritism shown by nature, regardless of what kind of car you drive, what type of phone you use, or how much money you have in your checking account. If you do something you aren't ready for, or haven't planned out, you run a significant risk of becoming just another statistic. People like to say that when you're in a life or death situation, your entire life flashes before your eyes. Bull. Maybe it happens to some people, but what I found to be most significant was what I didn't see, and what I didn't think about. All of the things that have so utterly consumed my life, problems I couldn't see a resolution to, challenges I saw as insurmountable, relationship difficulties, all of these became insignificant. An hour prior, they weighed heavily on my mind. Now, they simply weren't important anymore. The river gave me a whole new perspective on things, one that I'm not likely to forget anytime soon. I'm not trying to dissuade anyone from going out and having fun. Just know your limitations. If you want to do something reckless, by all means go out and do it. Just know what you're getting yourself into, and have a backup plan in case things go wrong. Take care of your body, other than your life. It's all that you really have. In some cases, like the day before yesterday, your level of physical conditioning can actually help save your life. I initially thought that all of the time I spent in the gym was worthless, that the hours upon hours every week of hitting the weights didn't really matter when it came to a situation like this. After thinking about it, I know this to be false. The better conditioned you are, the better suited you are to respond to a situation. It allows you to do things that you otherwise would be limited in. However, there's only so much your body can do. It's important to have some sort of religiosity. You don't have to be a Christian, or a Muslim, or a Buddhist, just have some sense of a higher power. It could be nature, even. In the end, everybody is going to die. What you choose to do in between when you're born and when you die is up to you. Go out and do things. Meet people. Travel places. Enjoy life. Too long didn't read. Tried to kayak across the Mississippi in March. Sank. Swam the other half. Got hypothermia. Decided to stop doing stupid things. Wow. Seriously. Wow, dude. I'm shocked you didn't get swallowed up. Seriously, you are so lucky. The Mississippi is a beast. It's like a real-life Oregon Trail story. My wagon always sank. Most well-written fuck-up I've ever read on here. Glad you made it out to tell the tale. A co-worker and I were on a river for work and capsized our canoe. I won't relay all the details ATM, and while we weren't in the water nearly as long as you were, it was a similar temp, though. Some of the things you've described here resonated. The stupid decision that put us there. That combo of racing and calm mind. The recognition of the one chance to get out of it. The acceptance of death followed by a refusal to accept it. Letting go of some of the banal frustrations of life as nothing but that comes with having made that acquaintance with the Reaper. Glad you made it out. Water is a powerful thing, and I mean that in a literal way, more than metaphorical, and I think people don't give it the respect it deserves. I haven't quit going out on rivers, but you can bet your ass I'm more careful about a few things. A wonderful and frightening story. I am glad you have lived to tell the tale. That is a hearty amount of bravery to paddle across the Mississippi. Were you a Boy Scout? Nuances in your story remind me of my time in scouting. Wow. Not sure how you picked up on that, but yeah, I'm an Eagle Scout. As is my dad, and also my triplet younger brothers. The rule in our family was you don't get to drive until you get Eagle, so we had a lot of motivation.